What's good, everybody? I'm back here for another episode here. This time I'm talking about interviews and resumes and so forth. And so I'm actually here to give the recruiters some advice and try to help the recruiters out. So I see a lot of things with recruiters. The biggest thing is red flags. So this is how they decide whether they're going to interview someone. And not only that, once they interview this person, how they figure out they're going to weed out or determine this person isn't good fit for the job. So when you're looking at a resume, if you see gaps in a resume, it'd probably be a real good idea to get real in depth and figure out why they have a gap in their resume. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they're a bad employee. They could be the best employee. They could have all of the credentials, all of the skills, and you could be overlooking them because what happens is recruiters, they like to be traditional. Nobody wants to rock the boat. They want to go by what other people have done in the past. Why can't you be unique and start hiring people on your own scale? Now, you can use the blueprint from other recruiters, but at some point, if you want to go to the next level and you want to get those top employees, try some different methods. Don't be copycat. You want to be copycat and try to do what everybody else is doing, and you could be missing out on talent. So I was looking at a couple clips, and I know one of them was like I was talking about the gap in employment. I think another one is longevity. They're looking for longevity in your last position. That could have been a bad job. They could have just picked that job, and it was just a bad pick for them. And so they were trying to find a way to get out of that job because companies probably are horrible, the benefits are horrible, just bad karma, drama. Who knows what's going on in that job? Be a little bit more in depth when you're looking or studying the applicants, and don't be so uniform and copying. So listen to this, Tech. It's pretty much the same thing I was saying for the recruiters. Don't try to dictate or create the narrative as opposed to actually talking to them and see why they had gaps or why they were job hopping. So she hit it spot on. So take a listen to.
This one's for you. I'm a recruiter. I know lots of recruiters. Had an opportunity to look through lots of resumes. And one thing we all agree on is if you're that person who has had multiple jobs within, say, a 5-year time span, we're immediately thinking, is this person never satisfied? Do they jump ship for 50 cents? Are they constantly getting fired? What's the deal? Now, you might have very valid reasons for why you've changed jobs so frequently. Maybe you're following a military husband who's moved. Maybe your company closed down or went through a massive layoff. That's fine and very relevant. Put it on your resume. Use that as an opportunity to tell us what those transitions were. It's going to increase your chances of getting an interview for that potential job. Don't let us write the narrative in our head. Tell us what the transitions were all about. Maybe you've had some very valid reasons for moving jobs frequently. Tell us what those are in the comments below.
First off, I'm just going to give my opinion. I think a lot of times recruiters, they get a little bit beside themselves when they're looking for red flags, and a lot of times they're passing up candidates based on something simple. Because think about it, no one's perfect. So if you're looking for something and looking for things to weed people out, then obviously you're going to find something. Now, if there's something that stands out, like, hey, the grammar is just way off, they just don't sound right, they're not making any sense, okay, that's one thing. But if you're looking at their address and like, hey, they live here, no, they live too far, they're gonna turn it down. What's another one? Gaps in your resume. So recruiters, I think a lot of times they're passing people up. They're looking, okay, it's got a gap in it, but you don't know that person's what reason why they have a gap in their resume. So why don't you take the time out and interview them and see if you can figure out what that gap is in their interview, why their gap is in their resume during the interview, I should say. So I think I was talking about this before. When they're looking at resumes and cover letters, they're just chucking these resumes without putting thought into it. So I'm gonna play some stuff for you, and then I'm just gonna discuss and kind of talk about what I feel, how I feel like I could probably help recruiters in finding the right people and not missing out on talent. Recruiters, don't do this. Don't chuck a resume just because of an email.
So a little known fact about what recruiters are thinking when they look at your resume is that they're a no. They don't want to interview you, and they're looking for reasons to support that decision. Read my caption below to find out what you can do instead.
The next thing to avoid is unprofessional email addresses. And I still scratch my head because I have seen some of the most colorful email addresses, and I sit there and think to myself, like, do they not feel that this is appropriate? Like, I usually partyboy28@yahoo.com. So if you created an email address that dates back to your college years and you weren't thinking much about it, it's probably a good opportunity for you to just go and create a Gmail account with your full name or some moniker that is relatively neutral. I would avoid any nicknames or anything that's going to potentially discriminate against you. But let's not give the hiring manager any reason to potentially judge you or make assumptions about you. So just create a clean email address.
I've gathered top secret information from recruiters on how candidates can stand out and shine through their resumes.
Let's jump to the reporting room where we will be uncovering the top resume red flags. Brittany, tell us about the first red flag.
Well, Terry, red flag number 1, outdated formats that include profile pictures. Save that for social media. And avoid fancy fonts. You want to use fonts like Times New Roman or Arial. Terry, what are some common mistakes you've seen on resumes?
There are a few common mistakes I see really often. A disorganized resume. We want to see your current position first and then work back up to 10 years. And back to resume formatting, you definitely want to proofread. Typos and grammatical errors are another huge red flag. This small mistake can give recruiters an impression that you have no attention to detail. Be sure to include your contact information. This would include your phone number and a professional email address. Brittany, how selective should someone be when they're adding jobs to their resume? Should I include that babysitting job from junior high?
Good question, Terry. While it's essential to highlight your relevant work experience, avoid listing unrelated jobs that don't add value to your current career goals. Instead, focus on achievements and responsibilities that align with the job you're applying for. Do not list jobs that ended more than 10 years ago. We don't need to know that you babysat or cut grass in high school, unless you're coming to my neighborhood. Generally, you don't want to include your hobbies, but if you're new to the workforce, you can include volunteer experience or leadership experience that occurred during your college years. Instead, list 3 to 5 bullets that include your achievements and transferable skills. You're totally right, Terry. What about cover letters?
Personally, I say skip the cover letter and focus on perfecting your resume.
It's not bad if you want to stand out from the other resumes. Include keywords from the job description in your resume. What do you think of gaps on the resume? Should they explain the reason for the long gaps?
There are many reasons why someone could have a gap on their resume. As a recruiter, we're always going to ask you about those in the interview process.
Most definitely. You want to list if you were a contract worker or a part-time worker. This may be helpful to understand why someone worked at a company for a short amount of time or bounced around to multiple companies. Keep in mind, we're going to ask. Be ready. Stay tuned for more updates. We hope these tips help you on your next application. And head over to Equifax's career site for more career advice.
LinkedIn is super powerful because it gives recruiters access to you, your resume, your profile, your work history, your education, your achievements, all that great stuff. And it's all right there. And the reason why it's so powerful too is because we use it to source. And basically sourcing or a sourcer, all recruiters are sourcers, not all sourcers are recruiters. Ooh, okay. So a recruiter is someone who will take a candidate through the entire life cycle from the application to the offer, and then they hand you off to onboarding. A sourcer works with a recruiter at the front end of the process. And so they're not the ones doing your offer, but they're trained to like look for unique niche profiles that a recruiter may not necessarily have the time to do because we're covering the entire span, whereas they're just focused on the front end. So just a little tip, side note, I know people like to reach out to recruiters on LinkedIn, and I get messages every day. Reach out to sourcers.
I didn't even know that.
Reach out to talent sourcers too.
2016, I got locked in that cell, they ain't let me
Gives
out.
recruiters
You know
access.
that I'm ballin', I'm hustlin', I ain't never seen a drop. Spending this cash, but I cannot forget to make sure all my niggas on. Spending this money, no question. 2016, I got locked in that cell, they ain't let me out. Money I'm talking, you know that I'm ballin', I'm hustlin', I ain't never seen a drop. Spending this cash, but I cannot forget to make sure all my niggas on.
primarily in the US or North America, although I do believe it is relatively common in Mexico. We don't want somebody to judge us. For me as a recruiter, when I see a resume that comes with a photograph, I almost automatically assume that they are not based in the US. And this is particularly important for those of you who are outside of the US and trying to get work in the United States. However, you're located in an area of the world where the photograph is a common thing, then do what's customary and make sure that you're consistent. The next thing you want to avoid on your resume is anything that has personal identifiers. So you don't want to put what gender you are, what race you are, what creed you are, what color you are, what marital status. I've actually seen people write that they're married with 2 kids. You don't want to put any of that stuff in there because, again, we're trying to eliminate any decisions made on us that are not work-related, and whether or not you have kids could be used against you by an unscrupulous employer. And unfortunately, I would say it probably does happen. So let's not give them any reason to screen us out based on that stuff. Just omit anything that has a personal identifier that in particular is a protected class. There's a law against it. Don't include it on your resume. Don't give low-hanging fruit for an employer to discriminate. Now, again, this tip is US specific. So if in your country these are common things to include, then follow the local tradition. But I would try to avoid putting any more detail than you need to regarding things that are not work-related. The next thing that you should avoid is full addresses. That's no longer needed in a resume. All we need to know is what city and state you are. Number one, we don't need to know where you live. We're not going to send you any mail or stop by your house. Number two, we don't want to give the employer any reason to discriminate against your application. So, like, I'm thinking distances. If you live on one side of a city and you're applying to a job that's on the other side and you think that the commute is reasonable, however, maybe they had somebody in that role that just quit because of the long commute, and now that hiring manager is particularly sensitive to people who have over 45-minute commutes, and they screen you out based on that. And I've seen that actually happen, and it's unfortunate. Of course, we don't want hiring managers making assumptions about candidates without them confirming, but if you avoid putting the specific location, just put the city or the state, and you don't even have to be specific. If you live on the south side of Minneapolis, you could just put Minneapolis. You don't have to be specific about the individual town. I'll also say that if you are a remote worker, people will say, well, I don't need to include the address there. And that's actually not true. Recruiters still want to see what city and state you're located on because it could be particularly important for time zones. So if you're based in East Coast and you're supporting a West Coast group, there is a few hour time difference that you need to be aware of, and that might be a deciding factor. And there's also certain geographic regions that you have to be located in order to qualify for certain jobs. Thinking taxation issues, the company has to be set up to do business in that area. And this is particularly important or particularly true if you are living in another country. You can't live in Brazil, for example, and apply for a US-based position. You still have to go through the proper protocol, and that company has to be set up to do business in Brazil to be able to hire you that way. The next thing we want to avoid is any work history that's not relevant or that is over 10 years old.
So in closing, I know we have a lot to dissect. This message really, or this video really was toward recruiters, but it's also to candidates and potential employees that are looking to do interviews. Do's and don'ts. So this is the end of the session here on talking about resumes and recruiters, and basically some things that you shouldn't do and things that we ask the recruiters to be a little bit more understanding. Try to focus more on doing interviews as opposed to screening people and taking people out of the pot without actually talking to them. So